You're listening to Mark of the Maker. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Steiner and you're listening to Mark of the Maker. This is episode 79 of the show. This is the second half of our conversation with knife maker JB Stout. First, before we get back into that chat, we got a couple of things we got to take care of. Mark of the Maker is a panel discussion between myself and three knife maker friends, Tom Crine of Crine Knives, Sean Kendrick of Kendrick Knives, and Michael Birch of Birch Tree Blade Works. These guys are guys that I've known and hung out with for a very long time, and so we get together and chat knives, do interviews, talk about knife history, and other great stuff. So if you're just joining us, that's who we are. We are supported in this show both by some excellent supporters through Patreon. Patreon's a site where people can basically set up a contribution subscription type thing to help support things in the world of the arts and broadcasting and other things. So we have some great support through Patreon. And then we are supported by our friend George Palagonia at American Metal Exchange. You can find George at amxinc.com. George has some excellent knife making supplies, titanium, Damasteel, Chad Nichols, Damascus, exotic materials like zirconium and other crazy stuff. George is the man for all of that stuff. If you're not getting your stuff from George, you should. And we appreciate you, George. Thanks for supporting the show. George helps us, along with our Patreon folks, keeping the lights on. So let's dive back into it with JB Stout. We walked up through some basics with JB in our first part of our episode, kind of where he came from, how he grew up, what his background is like, his first couple of knife shows, including his first blade show and his experience there. And we're going to dive back into it, talking about his transition to full-time knife making and kind of what went into that and what it was like. Thanks for tuning back in with us. So on the timeline, we talked about when you met Brad Blunt, right, and became friends. And then we talked about your CNC machine, but there's a bit of time in between there too, right?
Oh, yeah, a lot.
So let's talk a little more about that. So you met Brad. You're still working at that point? You had switched to making knives full time? When did that transition happen?
Yeah, at that point, I was still working full time in a machine shop. And I believe right around the time, before I decided to go full time, I had been working for this machine, and you remember 2008. There was it was bad financially. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was just a bad time, and so 2007, I think, I was working at this family shop. Life was great, everything was going awesome, and then all of a sudden, he decides to sell the shop to a factory from Chicago that was wanting to build their new factory in Union City because there was they needed a railhead. And so it was near a railroad. Right. Yeah, they built gantry cranes.
Yep.
If you don't know what those are, they're basically the cranes that are used to move chassis for semi trucks and like those big containers. They move containers around.
Yeah.
So they wanted a place to set up so that they could move containers straight to this railhead. And, it was just a good location for them, and probably real estate was cheap. So in that, they needed a functioning machine shop. So my current employer sold his business. They gave an offer he couldn't refuse type thing. Right. So everything was looking good there. I actually got promoted to QC. They put me in QC, because I had been doing EDM work, and they were just so fascinated by that. They're like, hey, this guy knows stuff. So it's so they were like, we're going to make you the QC guy. And I was like, awesome, great. This is great. I finally get to be a white collar guy, sort of. And it was the closest I ever came to that. And so Then 2008 hit, and they had to lay off 40 people, like immediately. So they called me in the office, and the guy was like, well, we're in a bit of a situation. He said, this company, and I'm not going to say the name of the company, we only promote, we do not demote. In other words, they were fixing to fire me.
Yeah.
And because they couldn't put me back on the floor, because I would take a pay cut and all that. So my boss, my previous, the guy who worked there, he was like, you guys are fucking up by not putting this dude on the floor. Like, he's going to make you money. Because they didn't know they didn't know me as a machinist. So they was like, okay, we'll make a lateral move. We'll put you back on the floor. You're going to have to take a pay cut. And I'm like, hey, the job is a fucking job, And there was nothing at that time. All the other shops were going through the same problem. So
yeah, I was gonna say everybody's struggling at that point.
Yeah. So the dude saved my job, right then.
Yeah, yeah.
So for another couple years, I worked for this company, and dude, I went from making automated machines and building dies and molds to putting 1.5-inch holes in I-beam. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
moving big shit, it's crane, it's everything you use. You got to use a crane, to make the parts. And I'm like, this is not for me. This is great. So anyway, I ended up going to I found another job shop that was hiring. They liked me. I literally walked out, I was like, I'm going to work here. Fuck y'all. So, I worked there for a year or so. And then right before 2010, I think it was, at that time, my kids were little, and daycare here was outrageous. We were paying $300, $350 a week for daycare.
Yep.
And that was a significant amount for us. I mean, we had just built a house like 3 years before, paying on a house and all this stuff. And I had been on the U.S. end at that time. I was making fixed blades, and mostly fixed blades, some, trying to do folders, but I was making pretty good money, like as a side gig. And, so me and my wife start talking, and we're looking at this daycare shit. And so one day I was like, I think I've got an idea. And I said, we're going to, this summer, when the kids are out of school, which daycare was fixing to go up, it's going to get higher because they got them all day.
Right.
I'm going to find out if I can do this knife thing from home just for this summer and stay home with the kids. Like, I'm going to be Mr. Mom, and I'm going to take care of the kids and work at home. And of course, the next step was, how am I going to do this? With my boss, is probably not going to like my idea. So anyway, the dude that I worked for, he's an older guy, and he got his career start in Detroit. When auto boom.
Yep.
And he literally left his home and here in Tennessee and went up there blind, and that's where he learned to be a machinist.
Yeah.
So he was the kind of guy who took chances, and it paid off. So I told him my situation, and he literally looked at me. He was like, let me think about this for a few minutes, and I'm like, okay. I didn't get a no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So about an hour later, he comes back with a stack of fucking paperwork, and he's like, do you know what an FML is?
Yeah.
And I was like, I think so. He said, you're going to do an FML for 3 months, and you're going to sign this paperwork. And at the end of that 3 months, if you want to come back to work, you'll have a job. He said, but we need to make it legal. Yeah. And I looked at him, I said, dude, you're awesome. I said, you are awesome, And he was like, he said, I think you can do this. He said, I think you got the, he's like, I want to see you do this. He's like, I don't want you to come back, but here's your paperwork. And if you need to come back, I can't tell you no. You know, he was that kind of guy. So anyway.
Yeah, FML is in reference to FMLA, which is the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is a government thing that went into place to say, hey, if someone needs time off to take care of their family, which it was in part of this case, right? That there need to be arrangements between an employer and an employee that gives the employee the option to come back with certain limitations around it, right?
Right. And so I was like, this is awesome. Like, and here again, this is the luck thing. If this wouldn't have happened, I don't know what I'd be doing right now. So, because I didn't have the balls to quit my job, I didn't, I couldn't just walk. I couldn't walk away from the money I was making. I wasn't getting rich, but we were making it. We were a young family doing okay, and so it got close to the 2-week time of where I'm supposed to call and say I'm coming back or I'm not.
Right.
It was a success. I mean, we was able to pay our bills. Everything worked out great. The kids loved it. Staying home. And so right before the 2 weeks, Brooks is the old man's name. He calls me and he said, Jason, I got to tell you something. And I was like, oh shit, what, and he said, I just sold the shop. And I said, you did what? What? And he said, I just sold it. And I knew the other company, the other shop that he sold out to. So I'm like, well, worst case scenario, I know the guy. But he was like, don't worry about it. He said, your paperwork is going to transfer to them. Everything's good. I've already talked to Barry, the guy. And he said, everything, and I said, well, I was going to call you tomorrow and let you know that I'm doing this, I'm staying home. And he said, awesome. He was real excited about it. So anyway, he told me, he's like, there's going to be an auction if you need some equipment. And, I was like, oh, all right. So, a couple weeks later, I go up there and I got to look around at some stuff. So I ended up getting this, Thompson surface grind, Reed surface grinder, all ball bearing table, heavy piece of equipment, got a really good price on that. And then we're walking around in the shop looking at stuff. And I said, what about the hardness tester that was here? And, so we go back in the heat treat room and there's the Wilson hardness tester sitting there. And I was like, how much? And the guy was like, I don't know, $50. I was like, what? That's yes, I will take that, So I walked out of there with, some cool shit, to get me a good start going. But that helped a lot too, because at that time I was just starting to do a lot of, folders and stuff. Surface grinder really helps with that. That was 2010, I think. I think that's right. So that's when I went full time. That's when I bought the business license, so here again, it was 3 years, 2013 before I did my first show. 2014, me and Horton shared a table and I think we were beside Les. I think Birch was over in that area. Anzo was probably like across the aisle, that whole area over there.
Did you have my old table? I think maybe
that might be right.
I think because I was right in front of David.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, and so I remember Birch and Les. They had a couple collabs there.
Oh yeah.
Yep, and one of those knives. They were bid. One, I think one might have been bid, and one was Lotto, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
But the bid knife, I kept looking at it, and I was like, man, I want that. So that knife was like another one of those knives where I was like, oh yeah, it fit me, fit my hand. I've got kind of bigger hands, and it was just perfect. And so I was like, there's no way I can get, because the bid was already up. And I was like, nah, I can't, there's no way I can get that. So I ended up trading for that knife later on in my career. So I ended up with it, eventually. And then,
Cool.
yeah. So that's another thing about this whole knife maker thing is just the people that I've met, and people who were into the things that I was into that led me to connections with people who are experts at those things that I'm into. And, that whole thing, that's probably more important to me than anything else, really. I don't know. That's like my kickback for this,
It's a pretty wild ride for sure. And it's the people.
Oh, dude. And quitting my job like that. And then the guy, that day that guy told me he sold the shop, I swear to God, I had 5 gray hairs pop out. It was like, it was like, oh God, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? But
yeah, it's scary. It's scary to make that leap, no matter how much people will tell you, oh, you'll be fine. And it's like, but when you have kids and things like that, you're like, this isn't about just me. I'd hop off in a second if it was just me.
Yeah. And my biggest advice for people is make sure your house is paid off. Make sure, at least have a house,
Something, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. Now, I had a question from before, just a quick one about design work.
Yes.
Since you started off doing machine work, did you always start with a CAD type program for designing or a drafting type situation, or how did you do the actual design work?
Yeah. So for most of the fixed blade stuff, it was just drawing. Like I would draw something, cut it out, put it in my hand, kind of make sure everything felt right. And then I had to accommodate for most, if your hands are different than then you kind of got to accommodate for that, right? So if you've got bigger hands, you got to think about, well, that's not average. Or if you have small hands, you would have to think, okay, this is not average. So you kind of got to be able to eyeball that kind of shit, I guess. There's just you guys know, like you can look at a picture, right? Like if you look at a picture on Instagram of just a knife laying there, don't you kind of know how big everything is?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You get a feeling for proportions and lines.
Yeah. Like, unless somebody's taking a picture of a miniature and blowing, or fucking with people, you can kind of look at, okay, the blade on that knife, let's say the blade on a fixed blade, it's like out of proportion short. Like you can look at it and go, he should have made that about a 1/4 inch longer, or something like that. So I guess I kind of had an eye for that sort of. And here again, being completely honest about my process, I made my first folder. I learned how to make folders by taking apart a Graham CRKT Razel.
Mm-hmm.
I took that knife apart. I looked at it, studied it, figured it out, and probably my first internals, like the relationship of my lock and my stop pin and my pivot, are right off of that knife. And from there, I kind of started, I did my, everybody kind of tweaks things and finds out what works best for you, but that's how I started designing folders. And so from there, what I would do, I would get on CAD, and if I had a new design idea, I would start with those 3 things. So I would literally draw a circle for a pivot, a stop pin, and a straight line for the lock bar where it makes contact. Then I would draw the knife kind of around that, if that makes sense. Right. So I started there. And then what I found out was for most of my designs, I have a set, internals. So my stop, let's say if you take the Possum collab with me and Horton and my Blood and Thunder, they have the exact same internals. So the relationship of the stop pin, the lock bar, and the pivot, they're exactly the same. Even though the knives are completely different shape, those internals are exactly the same. It just made it easier, for me to, especially when it comes time to repair shit or whatever. But, so as far as design goes, the shapes, I don't know. I guess all of us design around like 100 things that we've seen, right? Like you get influences from this or influences from that, and then sometimes it's just out of necessity. Like say if you're looking for a particular blade shape and you want to figure out a way to fit it into that handle, into a handle, on a folder, and then you start kind of drawing that handle around the blade, I guess, I do that a lot, and it'll come out a certain way, and then you can go back and like add a curve here, add this, whatever. And kind of that's kind of how I do it on CAD, because it's just so much easier than sitting down and making 20 drawings, to do that. So,
Yeah.
and CAD, to me, it's just so much, the language makes more sense to me, so that's pretty much how I design. Now I have designed some stuff strictly in the programming. I use one CNC, and sometimes I'll get an idea, and I've got my laptop out here, and for whatever reason, I don't have my CAD on there. But I've got the cam, I've got the one CNC. I'll draw shit right there. Like I'll just draw it in one CNC and program it. So if I've got an idea that I want to get out, right now.
Yeah.
Now as far as my, process, I use water jet, and to some people that's, boogeyman talk, but, and my water jet process has changed dramatically because of the CNC. Okay. So used to, what I would do is have my blanks water jet, basically the profile. I would have my lock bar cut, and I would pierce the holes only. In other words, I didn't cut circles for my holes. They would just pierce them. So if you can think, like a 40 thousandths circle, basically. And what I found is that they are accurate enough to pilot. So I would pilot them, basically start with whatever my tap drill is. I use 440 a lot, and I would use that for my pilot. And then I would sandwich the two halves together, and then do all my reamed holes and all that, so that everything was matched perfectly. And I just did it on I've got a really nice drill press that drills straight. And then that's how I did it. Now with the CNC, I basically just have a blank water jet with tabs on it. No holes or anything, and then everything gets done on the CNC with a fixture.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, the difference in the design approach between design in the electronic space versus design using your hand on a piece of paper is always an interesting one to hear when we talk to knife makers, right? Because some can't do the computer thing at all. Some, I think like Michael, right, has been in the long, slow process of getting more comfortable with doing it on the computer side, which has ups and downs and pieces that you can't feel as easily as you can putting it on paper. But it's always interesting to hear different folks' approach.
Yeah. And also with, designing stuff in CAD, you do, just like you do writing sentences or drawing, you develop your hand knows where to, clicking that mouse it becomes the same thing, because you still have to envision that radius or whatever. And then, then you kind of know, should I use a 30-second radius here, or a 16th or some funky number, or whatever, what is going to work best at this spot right here, and so now you have the ability to make that perfect. You know what I mean? There's no lines that have weird humps or something in them, or, whatever. And the other part of it is just being self-reliant. Like, I know a lot of water jet places, if you use water jet, a lot of them will convert your drawing to CAD for you. That never works out exactly the way you want it to. It's or it may end up being, they interpret it a different way just so it will work mechanically or whatever. So just being able to do that yourself and send somebody a drawing, to me, that's a big deal. My biggest fear when I got this CNC was I hadn't programmed in years. Is like I said, I went full time at this in 2010, and I hadn't touched a CNC since then. So it was like, oh shit, what's new out there? Like, what am I missing? It used to be I was up to date on tech, and now I'm in the dark. So I was like, all right, I've got to find a CAD or a CAM program, and I've got to start playing with it today. So the first thing I did was found something, and I asked a bunch of different makers, what are you using? Obviously master cams and stuff like that are going to be the top of the food chain. But we all know what goes with that too. Mm-hmm. They cost a lot. So I come across this program called One CNC. A couple guys that I know were using it. I think McGinnis, Lee Williams, I think was using it. And I was like, okay, it's not that expensive. I'll give it a try. So I got the free trial thing. I was writing programs that night. So it was that easy. Like I was like, oh, well, this is just like, Gibbs or something like that. Or, so no problem there. Literally the day that the Haas guy came out to do the setup, I was making parts that afternoon. So I had already wrote programs, already had material here to start cutting, and I was making fixtures that afternoon. So, and and I was sitting there, and I'm like, holy shit, this really is like riding a bicycle.
Right.
Like my hands were doing things on the control board. You know what I mean? Like it's like they didn't forget where to go, and I can't even type. So I literally, use my index fingers and that's it. But
so I think it's an interesting aspect of this thing is coming at it, having a machining background of some form, right? Different guys have had different pieces of that, right? Die maker stuff, tool maker things, whatever, versus not. I think that also always brings its own version of challenges too, right?
Yes.
Like people that are not machinists, then maybe they don't have the same kind of guardrails in their head that limit their designs. And people that are machinists maybe sometimes can be in a little too tight of a box, right?
Yes.
And not be as organic or feel like they can do things that maybe they really can, right? Because they've been taught a certain way. Did you go through some of that stuff or continue to go through some of that stuff? Is that a piece of this for you?
Absolutely. Because like I think I said earlier, no matter how much machining you do, there's always going to be some handwork. Okay. So like, for instance, like when my parts on the fixture, I don't even do profiles on my frames because, in other words, I don't use an end mill to cut the profile of the frames, or I will use it on the blades just on the open and close, you know what I'm talking about? So where contact is made with the stop pin, I definitely mill that. But the rest of the profile, I do on the grinder. I do on my horizontal. Why do I do it that way? Because it's cheaper and faster, okay? So I'm going to burn up more end mills cutting those profiles, cutting meat off the profile, and it's actually going to take more time on the machine than for me to just put those frames together like I always did and walk up to the horizontal and clean up the edges, okay? So I'm not only doing that because of the practicality of it, but I also like to finish better, because that way I can control that. I can use, if I want to go use a 400, I can do that, or I can use a 60 if I'm looking for texture on the edge of my parts, So there's no point in me milling that if I'm ultimately going to end up, finishing that part on a grinder. So what I've noticed as a machinist, and this is strictly coming at, being in that trade for so long and seeing people that, there's some people that should never touch a machine. And and I don't, I don't mean that as an insult so much as it is. Some people just will never get it. Like they'll never understand how to be efficient with it or whatever. And they'll just end up wasting more time, or it may not be the best thing for them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So guys who come into the trade as machinists, we speak a different language. And again, that's not an insult. That's when you're used to talking about fractions, an 1/8 inch, a 1/16 of an inch, a 32nd, and then you try to have a conversation with a machinist who talks in thousandths. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. A 1/2 inch. The last time, what the fuck is that? That's 500 thousandths to me.
Right.
7/16. That's 437.5. It's like all those numbers, that's what I've been doing. And so sometimes when I'm talking to a guy who's not a machinist, that's a knife maker friend, there's a language barrier there. And you know what I mean? It literally is. So, and then as a machinist, here's the curse. I see people all the time taking pictures of a tolerance with a fucking caliper. And I'm like,
right.
What are you doing? That means nothing to me. It means, if you, to like the average person, or a collector, they're like, oh man, that's precise. What? I'm like, no, you can make that fucking thing read whatever you want to do. Like, why are you doing this? Do you know what a micrometer is? Do you have any idea?
What's
things
the
like
tolerance
that.
of your whole folder. I mean, someone just be like, I keep my tolerances with like above of what? What part? Where?
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And they start talking about tolerances and whatnot. And I'm like, I don't know if you understand what that word means. Like, tolerances can be plus or minus an 1/8 inch. Okay. They can be whatever they need to be. Okay. So, stuff like that bothers me as a machinist. But it would be just like if you were, I'm not going to say an expert, but well-versed in anything, and then you see a guy shitting all over it, it kind of bothers me a little. Obviously, it's an ego thing, but I'm a fucking narcissist. I don't mind admitting it, but it's like you see those things on a daily basis, like on Instagram or whatnot, or another. As a machinist, again, another one that gets me is when people take pictures with their oven door open at 1,800 degrees. And I'm like, what are you, do you enjoy replacing your coils? Is that something you really like? What are you doing? When I open that fucking door, dude, it's like 2 seconds. I'm in and out. Like them tongs go in, it's quick. Because I was taught that way from day one in the machine shop. Like, and I learned those mistakes the hard way. I was the guy that left the fucking door open while I was pulling parts out and got cussed at,
Right.
So now if you say something to somebody, they're like, well, it's not a big, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, okay, cool. So it's sometimes hard for me to shut the fuck up, but, so that's why the friends that I have, they're my fucking friend. I know they're my friends because they know me. They know that I'm never coming from a place of ill will, I've fought the haters. I've been in the trenches. I've done all that shit. So it's like, I'm just used to being around people who don't wear their heart on their sleeve. And sometimes that doesn't come off very well, but
sometimes it's just not worth it,
Yes. Thank God. Yes. That's wisdom.
I've had people ask me what I recommend, and just for instance on wheels, and I'll give my recommendation. They're like, well, I don't think that's going to be what I need. I'm like, well, what do you think you need?
Right.
And they'll tell me, and I'm like, that's exactly what you should get. That's what I would recommend the first time. That's what I should have recommended.
Yeah. Doesn't that burn your ass when people ask your advice on something and then they're like, well, I think I'm going to do this. And you're like, well, then why the fuck did you talk to me?
Yeah, I'm used to it now. I still will give my recommendation, but if they say other stuff, then I'm like, well, that's what you should get. because it's just not worth arguing anymore,
You guys were talking about earlier about people asking, I think something, like what's the best way, I don't remember what it was, but I had this guy message me the other day, and he's like, it's a young guy, and he was like, I'm thinking about getting into knife making. What's your advice? And he said, I don't really have a lot of equipment or whatever. And I said, start making knives by any means necessary. If you can afford to go buy a file and a piece of 1095, get to work. You know what I mean? Yeah. You've got to put in that fucking time, that time. And one of the, I don't want to get off on.
You learn so much by doing.
Yes,
period.
And I don't want to get off, be the boomer and go, what grinds my gears?
Whatever, boomer.
The amount of dudes now, and you guys tell me what you think about this, the amount of guys now who come out of the door making folders that have never made a fixed blade.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think the learning curve has been reduced so much with so many different work in progress.
That's a good point.
To me, it's the guys that they want to hop right into it. And I'm like, if you may be wasting your money, you don't need to buy all this shit.
Yes.
Like you said, get the file or get the something cheap. If the desire is there for you to finish a knife with all that hard work, then there might be something there. There might be something to it. And that's the important lesson to learn there is the desire and the passion there. Because if you finish a knife with a file and some shitty, stuff, it's there.
Yeah, so it's definitely case by case.
Oh yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of guys, new folder makers that didn't make fixed blades, and they're making huge construction mistakes. Like things that really matter in the end,
oh yeah.
And I think that you definitely cut your teeth with fixed blades learning those things. Like,
yeah,
for instance,
I agree with you.
Pin diameters, and glue and what's going to fucking crack your scale and what's not going to hold, there's certain things like from construction point that are going to really matter when it comes to folders.
Well, I get that, but I mean, look at Felder. He was one of the guys that started out making folders, and we're like, no, that's not. I mean, it kind of goes back to these ideas that we have to do it a certain way first.
But he was a machinist too.
He was a machinist. I mean, he would have just been wasting his time to, make fixed blades.
Right.
Yeah. And it matters where you're coming at it from, right? I think that's a real thing.
For me, it mattered. It mattered that I learned a bunch of shit that I had no idea about before I hopped into folders. For sure.
I guess my experience has been negative with that. I guess I'd say like the people that I do know that did it that way, it's turned out bad. I haven't really seen any positives in that. Not since probably Sam Edelman. Not Sam Edelman. Sam Johnston. Yes, sorry. Sam Johnston. That's one of the very few people I've seen that jumped into folders and obviously is a fucking savant. Had no idea how to do it and all of a sudden made magic. You know what I mean? Those people are so rare. But I guess my experience with that's been more negative with people and that's why I started the knife dojo thing, because I in a way, I kind of got frustrated seeing all that. And I thought, well, I've got to give back somehow, and I've got to make, I've got to do something, to get my methods out there or whatever. And I'm not doing anything groundbreaking, but everybody that's come through this class, there's been 2 people, I think, that decided to move, to go on and do something with it. And, both are doing pretty good. So any way I can help like that, that's kind of why I did that. But
why don't you explain a little more about what that is for people who aren't familiar? Because there'll be people that listen to this that don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the knife dojo is, it's basically a 2 to 3 day class, and for a fee. And usually I take on 2 to 3 people. Okay. Because of the size of my shop and the amount of machines I have, that's what's comfortable as far as let's get everything done. You know what I mean? So basically you come into the class, you make a knife from start to scratch, from scratch to finish, from raw material. In other words, we start with a bar of steel. You saw it out. You do everything. You drill all the holes. You do the grinds. You do the heat treat. You do everything the hard way. And we don't do chisel grinds. And obviously, you guys know I don't have a problem with chisel grinds at all. I do a lot of them. But I want people to learn to match a fucking bevel, okay? I think it's important. I'm not saying that makes a better knife by any means, because I do love chisel grinds, but I want people to have to do that. Okay. I think it is an important thing to do. So I know from knife makers, they're like, how do you get everything heat treated? Well, I came up with a solution for that. So as you all know, heat treat takes up a day. I mean, just because of the hours, the physical work of it doesn't take long at all, but it's got to soak. Okay.
Yep.
So what we do is the previous class cuts out blanks, puts the holes in, cuts the profiles. Those blanks go in the oven and they get heat treated for the next class. Okay. So the class before that heat treated blanks, those are the blanks that the class now will be grinding. Okay.
Yep. Makes sense.
So that way there's a continuum, and we don't have to waste a whole day waiting on heat treat. We can keep this thing moving. So you cut the blanks out and everything. That's the first thing we do is prep heat treat. That gets done, while that's working. Then we have our knife blank left over from the last class. It gets ground flat. It gets profiled. They grind the bevel. Basically on the bevel grinding, obviously I've got to jump in once in a while. They're not, if I see them getting in trouble, like they're getting a little too high on the grind or starting to get too thin, then I'll jump in and get a squared back up. You know what I mean? And then they got to, finish it out. But, we do bolt-on handles, because this isn't forged in fire and we can't glue handles in 5 minutes. So we do bolt-on handles, and I think the reason I chose to do that, really, I mean, we could get 5-minute epoxy and make it work, but because there's some machining aspects there. Okay, we're going to learn how to drill the right size hole. We're going to learn how to do counterbores. We're going to learn some thread stuff, some thread talk, a lot of little lessons in each one of those things, right? I mean, you can read a book and be like, you take this insert, drill this hole. I want them to understand thread strength and why we're using this thread as opposed to that one. Why are we counterboring this depth? All those things matter to me. They're important. So they get all those little lessons in there. And then we do Kydex Sheaths. The reason I think they should also do the sheath is, that's kind of part of having fixed blades. So right. I want them to do that whole process. And obviously they're working on I don't have shit equipment. I've got good stuff. So they also get to learn the value of having nice equipment. Okay. When you first start, and then that way, when they go back home and they decide they won't be knife makers and they get that shitty drill press and that, got to start out with a grinder that's not so great. They're like, oh, I get it now. This guy had to sell a bunch of shit and sell off his gun collection to buy tools. You know what I mean? There's sacrifices have to be made, there's a whole process there that I think people are learning, and, the way I do the class, I have a Facebook group, Stout Knife Dojo. Basically, you join the group, and what I do, and I haven't done it in the past year or so because of the, fucking COVID. But I basically will post a date. So let's say my next class is June 15th. So whoever can do that, they'll post. I can do that one because I know people have different work schedules. So it's not really a first in line kind of thing. It's more of which one of these dates works best for you, Yeah. And then you message me and we work it out. So, but I think I think it's like $500, and you walk out of here with a knife. You don't pay for shit. You get fed. You can sleep on my floor you want to, or you can go get yourself a hotel.
Yeah.
So that's up to you. But so far it's been a success. Like, of course, my biggest fear is injuries. You know, it's
Oh yeah.
anytime, and of course you got to sign a waiver. But
Yeah.
but we also go over that. That's a huge part of the class is safety and the PPE, and we make it as safe as possible. So it's not just some thrown together kind of shit. You know, I put a lot of time into it.
I wonder how much of that, I mean, okay, so you mentioned some stuff earlier when you're talking about using the horizontal grinder rather than the CNC to do profiles and stuff like that, right? Where to me, that all speaks to coming out of a job shop, because people that aren't familiar with that environment, right? Like you said early on, these businesses get paid for the work. They don't get paid by the hour. They don't get paid by whatever. They get paid for the work. So two key things. One, job shops need to know their shit so they can actually be done. Otherwise, they're going to start losing money fast. And two, they need to have like a grand wizard sitting somewhere in the corner who's the master estimator, right? Like, okay, I know what it's going to take to do this. And you know what I mean? They don't undershoot on price, because you don't come back later and say, well, gosh, we were wrong. It took a lot longer, a lot harder than what we thought. No. You get paid what you agreed to get paid. And so with that comes things like not using the CNC as the hammer for every nail, right? Like I'm going to use it for certain stuff where it makes sense. And then I'm going to have it doing other things that make me money or get ready for stuff in the future when I'm not using it right as a hammer. And then I'm going to do other more efficient processes or cheaper processes or whatever. That's all very job shoppy to me, right? That's machinist profession 101 kind of, you know, how the business runs piece. So that's a perspective that I think is a little bit unique. And then this idea of the dojo is probably a lot like the kind of process when you bring a new guy into the machine shop, right? Same thing. You got to teach them safety stuff so they don't get hurt, because you need them to actually show up to work. Right? You got to kind of start teaching them, okay, here's what this handle on this machine does, right? Here's what this machine is for. And that all to me fits this kind of picture, right? Of your background and it must influence all of that stuff.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a perfect description of this myth that the CNC maker just pushes fucking buttons. Because what, you know, as a machinist, as a tool maker in job shops, what people don't realize is, you're running that CNC, but while that thing's cutting parts, your ass better be on the mill drilling holes in something else.
Right.
So you're not standing there waiting for the fucking cycle time to be done. That's a production shop. That's a whole nother ball game. That's a production machinist. That guy ain't never going to bring home the bacon. You know what I'm saying? He's not going to get paid like the guy that's running 4 fucking machines every day.
Right.
And people, they hear that and they're like, no, you can't. No, you're running as many machines as you can keep moving. So if you're doing like a production job or something, you better be setting up 2 or 3 CNC mills, and you better be running back and forth between those machines all day long. And we want to see sparks coming off of those fucking cutters. Like, I mean, I'm not making that up. And it's people don't understand. Like a boss will come by and be like, you'll have a shell mill that's got, let's say 8 inserts in it, and all those inserts are $15-20 a piece. And you can flip them 3 times. But I've had several people like that I work for be like, I want you to run that thing until you shred that first set of inserts and then back off a little.
Right.
And that's not a joke. They want those machines pushed that hard. Mm-hmm. So, and that's how you make money in a machine shop. So when I hear people say like, oh, well, you just put the part, I'm like, you know what? Fuck you. Because you, in order for this machine to make money like it's supposed to, you can't stand there and watch it run. So I think one of the biggest things that, like, especially new guys that I don't mean new makers. I mean new machine people. Like when you get that new CNC, you're like, oh God, what's that fixing that now? And your hand's always right there by that e-stop and or the cycle stop, and you're sitting there watching it. And dude, now when I write a program, I know how to double check. I put the fucking thing in there and I walk away. I mean, that's how confident I am. Yeah, so that doesn't bother me anymore. So, but again, the thing goes back to the horizontal grinder. That end mill that's going to cut that profile that I'm going to end up cleaning up anyway. The cycle time that it's going to take to do that is way more than me changing parts out and walking while that next set of parts is running. I'm on the horizontal grinder cleaning it up. Like I've already screwed them together and, cleaned them up as one unit. So that's the whole thing. I get my son out here, every once in a while because I'm trying to teach him something to change parts. Yeah. If I catch him fucking around, I get on his ass. I mean, it's, I'm gonna teach him, what I know and how to be taught. So, and again, that's me. And I understand that there's makers, who use CNC and they're not trying to do a run. And I only do the most I've done is runs of like 8 or 10. So I have that same mindset, whether I'm doing 3 parts or 300. Okay.
Yeah.
But I do understand like new guys on the CNC, of course they're going to sit there and watch it run. Of course, because it's your shit. You can do what you want. You know what I mean? You know if you're making money or not. But that's my mindset, and that's just the way I do it. I mean, not saying it's the right way or the wrong way. It's just everybody is going to approach that differently. But either way, it's fine. I mean,
yeah,
that's why you get that insurance. People are like, well, after I pay this machine off, I'm going to drop the insurance. Do not drop the fucking insurance. That insurance is going to pay for your new spindle. Right. Okay. Right. When you crash that machine and you've got to pay 10 or 8 grand for that new spindle, the insurance is going to pay for that. So keep it. keep your fucking insurance because it's going to happen.
That's, I think, the point I was going at was the whole, just like the mental approach to what you're doing, right? Where on one side, it's okay, this is a tool that I know how to use and I know how to run it in a very efficient way. And because of where I came from, I'm compelled to run it in a very efficient way, right? Because that's what I think it's really supposed to do. And there's other people, like probably what Michael does with his more, right, is, okay, this is a specialty machine. That's all it is. It's just another specialty machine in the shop. And if I don't have parts running today, I don't have parts running today. And if your business works like that and you know what I mean, you make money and you're doing good, then great, right? It's just a fancy way to do intricate stuff that you have trouble doing otherwise, or maybe even couldn't do otherwise. And it's just an interesting contrast when you compare makers and look at differences.
Mine sat idle for a month after the Nick show. I didn't even turn it on. Like I came out here every day and did like fixed blades, and I had some extra parts ran up, and so I did some folders out of those parts, and I'd never even touched the damn thing. So it's not, my machine ain't running 24/7, but when it's running, I'm running around here like, a freak. But it's, exactly. Especially like, that's a good point. Like if you're using it as a better pantograph,
Right.
And a lot of people look at it that way, and I agree 100%. Like, you want 3D parts. If you want to use it just to do contours or, 3D type stuff, that's it's a tool for whatever job you want it to be.
Right.
And it's that same mentality. Let me ask you guys this question. I was talking to another maker about this, and it came up. We were talking about stone, earlier when we mentioned using stones to finish work and, doing hand finishes, hand rubs. And I don't do a lot. I've hand rubbed one blade in the past 3 years, and that's because of the hormones. Like once I started playing with hormones, and I got so obsessed with it. Like I was doing all kinds of stupid shit, and making some ugly fucking knives, and like just because I get obsessed with something and I got to figure out how to do this thing, or make it look the way I want to. So I quickly realized with Hamones, you need a hand rub, because your grind marks going, the width of the blade, they fuck with the light in a way that lengthwise marks don't. Okay. So if you really want to bring it out, if you really are looking for those little hidden lines in there, you've got to rub it out. I mean, there's just no other way to do it. Okay. So I started playing with that more, getting more into it. But anyway, I was talking to another maker about Hamones, and we kind of got on the subject of hand rubs and this and that and the other, and about how some people still have this mentality that because they do hand rubs or whatever, they feel like that equals higher price or more value. Again, no matter what your process is, I don't think, if you're getting paid by the hour, like Mark said about, the job shops, then yes, yeah, it's definitely going to translate into a higher price, right? Will more people buy it if you start charging by the hour? Probably not. You're probably going to lose some customers, but you're still going to have people that there's still be a market. But so here's my question. If I'm using me as an example, if I grind a blade on the grinder up to the point where it should be hand rubbed, okay, and then I hand rub that blade, or if I mill a bevel to the point that it should be hand rubbed, end result being the same, that I hand rub the blade, should there be a price difference? Should one be worth more than the other if the end result of that knife is exactly the same?
I think that the problem is saying should. It doesn't matter. Like we've talked about, it's subjective. Whatever the end result is, if you're getting paid for it, it does not fucking matter.
That's what I think. But there's people who will argue that because I didn't do the work of grinding the blade, it doesn't deserve as much money.
But there's no deserving. That's the issue we have here. There's nothing that deserves the money. It is what it is. The price is what it is. You pay it or you don't. Whoever buys it, it's between you and him. If they're happy with it, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
But that's this mindset we kind of get stuck in of like, oh, this needs to be this much because this is the like hours per minute, or or how much I'm getting paid per hour sort of shit.
Right.
This is art, however we want to look at it, and it is subjective. So, and it's unnecessary as far as like a need. It's a luxury, it's a want, it's a desire, and all that stuff goes into it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter time, effort, energy, any of that. If I'm better skilled than you are at grinding, per se, I got to do it a lot faster.
Right.
It doesn't. It's whatever you can sell it for, right? I've had people tell me that, hey, I did this and I have to get this much because I have this much time in it. And it looks like a bucket of worms, it's like that. It doesn't work, man.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah. Or someone will say, this is, if so-and-so sells this for that much, well, then that may be the knife for you. My knife may not be for you. And that's okay.
Yes.
All that's okay.
And that's my attitude, exactly. And I think that I just feel there's people that I run into all the time at shows that are exact opposite of that. And it's like they look at your work, or let's say that you've got a really good bid going, and dude, I've literally had makers come up to my table and shake their head and walk off. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just like how in the fuck are you getting this kind of money? You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
and the reason they wonder that is why they aren't.
But and that's my whole point. I don't.
I mean, seriously,
you're right, and I still can't wrap my head around that thinking. You know what I mean? Like it's still.
You'll never explain it to them either.
Yeah.
Well, it's perceived value, and we try to justify or look for some value in everything.
Yeah.
And somehow it has to be time. Like someone who is a abstract painter who may not put as much time as in like a realistic or realism type of art. Should it go for less? Because it's subjective. I mean, it always has been.
And I think another reason why I have such a hard time understanding it is because I don't really collect folders. Like when I don't either. You know what I mean? It still blows my mind every time I sell a knife, and for the price that I sell it for, it still is it's still, I don't understand it. Right? Like I don't think I ever will. Now, if a guy shows me a fucking GA precision rifle and they tell me they paid $9,000 for it and then another, $6,000-7,000 for a scope, I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? I totally understand that. Like it makes complete sense to me. But to most people, they'd be like, you just paid almost $20,000 for a fucking rifle? Really? That makes complete sense to me. So it's just it's all on what you like,
I think like we talked about, the deserve thing is
it's
the wrong kind of language and thought.
Probably
process.
A terrible word. Yeah.
I hope I never get what I deserve. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yes. Yes.
So, I mean, and it's one thing at the base pricing level, right? Where, okay, say you have a folder that's got a table price of $1,600, right? Which was outrageous compared to a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
It's compared to the $500, $650 table price knife. So, okay, say a knife has a table price at $1,600 and a fancified twist on it is on bid. Those are two completely wildly different situations too, right?
Absolutely.
Where it's like, okay, people might have the whole deserve thing going on at one level with, oh, well, he's getting 1,600 and I got knives on my table at $7 and I can't get rid of them. Okay, there's hurt feelings and human being stuff that fits in there that makes that complicated. And then turn it up to 11 by putting a bid piece on the table, right?
Right.
Which rarely has to do with, what it's, quote, worth by any equation, right? Yes. Sometimes it's a straight up desire thing. Sometimes it's maybe most of the time it's some combination of flex with, that's a special piece that I know there's not going to be another one and I want to be the person that owns it, right? That it has sometimes, or maybe many times, little to do with, oh, it's got Mokutai this or that, or pearl this or that, or fancy plate steel this or that. No, that's unrelated, right? It's such a small piece of it that it doesn't really matter.
I've literally attempted to prove that, and did. I have bid plain tie knives that had, some extra milling or something to make it look, set it apart, and got crazy money, and then be like, so none of this, I had to prove to myself that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I love Mokutai and stuff like that, but just because you put that on your knife doesn't make it a more desirable knife. It's right. It still comes down to that fucking shape. It still comes down to the design.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I've been lucky in that point too, I guess, where, and we all have, everybody here, where you know that you have a core group of people that are going to support you pretty much through everything, right? I mean, everybody here could probably name, 4 guys at least that will, whatever you want to make, they want to buy it, right?
Right.
At least that many. And that's really what matters, right? I mean, because you connect with those people more because they understand what you're doing. They understand, what your vision, I guess, is, if you have one.
They get it.
They get it. They totally fucking get it. And you know it. They look at your work and they look at you and you're like, yes, you're the man. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean,
you know why we're here.
It's extremely powerful, right? To have that.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it kind of goes to some of the earlier comments about, like Tom mentioned something about, I'm Right, afraid if something goes wrong, right? Or what if I can't sell knives anymore? Or what if nobody cares at some point, right? Okay, that's terrifying. And having a specific base that it's very powerful, right? I think for you guys, it seems like it gives you more opportunity to do what Burke advised you to do, which is do what you want, right?
Yeah.
It gives you space and call it fortunate, blessed, whatever version of that you'd like to use, right? You're extremely, it's extremely valuable.
Yeah.
So, man, we've been running a good time here. So let's get to some fun questions. We usually ask some fun questions as we kind of head toward wrapping things up.
All right.
Michael, you want to take a swing at one?
Yeah. What's your favorite machine in the shop?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would have to say the lathe.
Lathe,
because when I get on the lathe, it's a whole different language almost, and I probably tend to concentrate more, I guess, and come up with ideas, not so much ideas for parts or anything, but ideas for setups and ideas for how to do, different way to do something. And like, I guess because the last couple years I worked in a machine shop, that was mostly what I did, was a couple CNC lathes and this big fucking monster Cadillac lathe that I ran from the 1950s. And dude, I'm not joking. The fucking chuck was almost 6 feet in diameter.
Yeah.
And the tool post, the tool post was, I think it was like 8 by 8. So if you can figure 8 inches square, that's how big the tool post was. So, yeah, I'd say the lathe.
You think there's a piece of it that has to do with kind of going back to your earlier times before CNC type stuff, where it's like to me, running the lathe is like it probably shouldn't feel this way, but it's very connected to the machine, right? It's like,
yeah,
there's something about the lathe controls that feel different for whatever reason.
Exactly. Like I would, I guess a good example of that, there was a guy in here, and I cut some threads for him for some little part. And when I cut threads, that machine never stops. And so people are like, well, what do you mean it doesn't stop? And I'm like, it doesn't fucking stop. Like I have indicators set up and everything. That spindle's rolling. I use the feed to take a cut. I'm out of the cut. I go back to my indicator. I roll back to 0, dive in for another cut, and I'm done cutting those threads in a few minutes. And the guy was sitting there watching. He was like, what? He was like, dude, what the fuck, man? He was just impressed, that I'm like, dude, this is average.
Right.
I'm like, this is nothing special. I was like, if you've ever been in a shop and watched, 3 guys cut threads, it's almost like a fucking competition,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that kind of stuff, and I think that's why, because there's much more focus, I think, on something like that. You can't look away. You know what I mean? You can't be distracted when you're cutting threads or
right.
Or worse, grinding threads. I mean, I know there's some people that don't even understand that that's a thing. I used to grind threads too with, if you can imagine a wheel with a sharp edge on it, 30 degrees, whatever it is, 29 degrees, and it's facing you. So the part is in front of you, just like on a lathe, horizontal, but the wheel is actually on the other side of the part, and the edge of the wheel is facing you. So when you dive in to cut those threads, there's a little risk involved there of that fucking thing shattering.
Yeah.
And getting a piece of wheel in your face. So, doing stuff like that when you're 20 years old, and you don't, you're green as hell, and it's like the first place, and it's kind of scary,
Yeah. Right.
So
yeah. What about you, Sean? You got a question?
Yeah, man. You got a favorite movie knife?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, it's actually a favorite movie sword.
Oh,
I can't really say knife, but so remember I told you about the Kung Fu theater. There was a guy, I'm sure you've heard the name, Sho Kosugi. And
Revenge of the Ninja. Fucking
that's
it.
right. So the first time, and I'd seen katanas in movies and all that kind of stuff. The first time I saw that ninja sword, I was like, wait a minute, this makes more sense, and so I started looking into it, and those ninja toe or ninja katana was the proportions of that sword. The blades were usually 24 to 26 inches, and the handle was 12 inches long, right? So it's pretty much, the handle was a third of the total length. And for some reason that was just always the sexiest thing ever. Like, and especially like the ones with it had a wider blade or whatever. And, but he was, when I saw him, I was like, why is his sword? And then, then you find that you dig into the actual history of it. And obviously it's easier to maneuver. That's why they had it on their back. Because of your arm length, when you ran your hand down to the suba and you pull it out, it's out of the sheath, right? Just by raising your hand. So you've drawn that sword now. It made so much more sense to me. And I think that was probably, that's probably my favorite.
Dude, awesome answer.
I
actually watched a little bit of that movie on YouTube the other day.
So cool.
Right.
I always loved the butterfly knives in those movies. I don't know why. Those were great movies. I can remember waiting for the next one to come out.
You mean the real butterfly knives, like the big wide blade?
Yeah,
butterfly
two that
swords.
went together.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, I don't know if any of you guys ever did this, but were you like name nerds when you were young? Like people would call a ballet song, they'd be like, "That's a cool butterfly knife," and I'm like, "It's not a fucking butterfly knife. It's
It's a clip."
That's because of the symbol from Benchmade. I was like, that's why it's called. That's why you think it's a butterfly knife. But yeah, those are cool too.
That's funny. Tom, you got a question?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about you playing music, but we never talked about what kind of music you play. I always, in my mind, I kind of knew you did music, and I pictured you like fitting in with Clutch. Your voice kind of has that sound, and it looks like if we dressed you up, we could put you in there and it'd be perfect fit. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. So when I first started playing guitar, say my dad was a musician. He tried to teach me when I was like 5, and I wasn't having it. I was like, this is stupid. I don't want to do this. But he kind of tried to force it on me in a little. And then I think he realized he's going to have to do this on his own. Right. So it didn't take long, actually. When I was about 10 or 11, I just picked up one of his guitars one day, an acoustic, and I just started kind of plucking around. And so I could tell that he was like, yes, he's going to do it. He's
Right. Proud dad moment.
Yeah, exactly. He's gonna try it, and after that, dude, I never put it down after that. Like, it's something just is in me, I guess. And so starting out, obviously, I was into what my dad was playing all the time, what I was hearing, and that was mostly Southern rock, blues, Molly Hatchet, obviously Skinner, that kind of stuff. That's kind of what got me started playing. I went through that Hendrix phase, and I still sometimes, Mark will know what I'm talking about, I still thumb, my E string.
Yeah.
Like I grab the guitar, I make chords by thumbing the E string, the roots, like Hendrix did. I can do that stuff. But life changed when I heard Black Sabbath. And
hell yeah. Fucking A, man.
And the first song that I heard from Black Sabbath was War Pigs.
War Pigs. I was going to say, yeah.
And I knew bar chords and all that. So I was able to sit down and actually play it, figure it out myself, because honestly, it's actually pretty simple shit,
Yeah.
There's nothing complex about it. It was just that group of guys together, made something completely, you want to talk about originality. Okay. Those four guys, they literally created metal. I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So from
Agreed.
there, my teenage years, I was really into progressive shit like Testament, obviously Slayer, Metallica, all that stuff. But at the same time, in the closet, when my friends aren't around, I'm playing Stevie Ray Vaughan licks. So, I've always been a blues guy deep down, especially when it comes to playing lead stuff and things like that.
Do you know who Tom Feldman is?
I've heard the name.
I sent you a little link. He plays a lot of jazz or blues. I mean, and does like the slide. I really like his work.
Oh, dude, I went through I don't know if you guys remember the movie Crossroads.
Yep.
Oh yeah, Steve Vai,
yeah.
man.
Steve Vai, boy, that was the first time. Like I think I was like 10 when that came out or something. And of course, my dad was into the slide shit. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
blue stuff.
Yeah.
And then I see Steve Vai and I'm like, what the fuck, man? It's like, and then obviously, the movie, Steve Vai loses the guitar duel, but we all know,
Yeah.
we all know how that shit really went. But
Yeah.
so I actually got more into Ry Cooder, who was the guy who did all the slide shit in the movie. So Steve Vai obviously was playing the classical licks. They called it Eugene's Trick Bag was the classical piece that he played, based on the Paganini kind of riff,
Yeah.
all the blazing lead shit. But anyway, Steve Vai actually wrote the whole thing. And then it was actually him and Ry Cooder. Ry Cooder was playing all the slide shit in the duel. And, but as much as Steve Vai impressed me, the Ry Cooder shit impressed me just as much, because that was the first time I'd heard slide music before. Obviously we all heard Freebird. But that was something else. It was like, whoa, this guy is making fucking chords and shit with this thing. It's,
right.
yeah, it's completely different. And so I really got into, every guitar player, I think, goes through these phases. It's like the Yngwie phase, the Hendrix phase, the Clapton, everybody, you get focused on these guitars, different players, and you end up developing your own kind of sound, which, that's how it's supposed to happen. And I think, I can draw so many parallels between being a musician and being a knife maker. It's literally the same concepts on everything, because your influences come out in your work and you don't even realize it. Like you don't even,
Right.
like when I started doing the Art Deco thing on my knives, that was a complete fucking, just a thing that came out. I was because it's more like a Native American kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Really? But I remember my grandmother had all this shit in her living room, like lamps and stuff.
Shit.
And it was all Art Deco shit. And I wasn't, I don't give a fuck about furniture. But I remember she had all this stuff, like the lamps and like this, knickknacks and shit and stuff that goes on the TV. And maybe it was just because the stuff was from that era. I don't know. But everything had that look, that Empire State Building look.
Yep.
And I don't know, most of you guys won't know, Mark probably knows, I think they're called D'Angelico guitars. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. And they're like these big jazz, Gibson 335 looking guitars.
Big arch tops. Yep.
You ever look at their truss rod cover?
Yeah.
Dude, that's where that came from. That,
Yeah.
That's what that is. It's just that art. It's that same fucking pattern. So that's where I got, that's where I got the idea. That's where that came from. And I can't remember who it was that told me. Maybe it may have been Kendrick that told me this, actually. I think we were talking about fullers. And I was like, I do these fullers on all my blades at the time. And I think it was you. You said something like, well, once you start doing shit, you gotta keep doing it. Like, you can't quit doing that thing. And that stuck with me on the Art Deco thing. I was like, I just started fucking doing it on everything. And I think that's kind of how you make something yours. I mean, because
100%.
Everybody will do something once or twice. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, oh, that was cool. And then they don't ever do it again. Well, I think you should, if you do something that's slightly different from anybody else, I say hammer that shit. You know what I mean? Because
pick a horse and ride it.
oh yeah, pretty soon it becomes part of your thing. Just like when I pick up a guitar and I'm jamming with somebody or something, I bend notes the way I bend them. You know what I mean? And I my phrasing is different than, I try to make it different. And let me explain that. Mark, phrasing and guitar playing is like when you hear Carlos Santana play a lick compared to Zakk Wylde, okay? They both do these things like the number of notes they play in each run, how they, they might play 4 notes and bend, and then there's those little things, you start to pick those up. So those are all signature shit, man. And like if you're into music, you recognize that immediately.
Yeah. All goes back to style.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's very personal.
And I would also get influence from machinery. Like, I started doing the ball chamfers on my stuff because everybody was just either rounding everything off, which is perfectly cool, or contouring. I remember Blunt did his chamfers with a fucking file. I mean, a lot of people don't know that. He had a setup with a vise, and he would, scribe lines on the face and on the edge, and he did all his chamfers with a file on tie frames. And so I was messing around one day in the shop, and I accidentally thought, okay, I'm going to try this ball end mill on that edge, see what it looks like, see how it feels. And I never quit. So I was like, okay, this is how I'm doing every fucking folder. And unless I just do a flat contour. And
the anti-fillet.
I do it on knife. I do it on my scales on fixed blades. It goes into my aesthetic,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, man, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If I can, I want to plug a couple things, if that's cool.
Yeah. Let it rip.
So for this year, I've got a couple things coming up that I would like to let everybody know.
Okay.
Me and Enrique Pena we're doing a collab right now. It's not really a collab so much as he has a knife called the Mula. And basically I took his knife and I did my thing with it. And we're going to do a run with Riate, or Riot. I may not be pronouncing that correctly. Those will be coming out sometime this year. It's going to be a limited run, like 200 pieces. Price range is probably, 300, 320, whatever.
Nice.
Got that coming up. I'm going to do some collabs with a guy named Donnie Starco. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that. That would be an interesting cat for y'all to talk to.
Yeah.
He's got this, what he calls an 8-bit nuck. And again, man, I am so, I was talking to Mark about this the other night. There have been no serious mechanism stuff like for folders, you know what I mean? Like in the past 10 or 15, since I've been doing it, that could translate into something that everybody can do, to where it changes the industry. It's been frame locks and liner locks, right? I mean, that's going to be the go-to forever, probably. Because, and don't get me wrong, I know people have done other mechanisms, but like I said, they don't always translate to every design possible, right? And so when I see stuff, even if it's something little, that's like, okay, this guy's thinking outside the box a little bit. You know what I mean? And so those Nucks were one of those things. Like, a friend of mine come up and he showed them to me. I'm like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, this guy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's fucking cool. He's putting these little, it's different. So,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, like with collabs. I don't collab with everybody that asks me. I've turned down more than I've done, It's always something that I think I can do something, put my spin on, or just somebody that I love their work or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And that was one of those things that I saw, and I'm like, oh fuck yeah, I can do something with that,
Yeah, your design language with his 8-bit thing would be a good combo.
Oh, dude, it's perfect. Like it's like we were thinking about the same shit, that. Right. And that's what I love about, especially when it comes to collabs. It's like you get to talking to a maker, and you're like, you like the same shit, and end up having a lot of the same influences, and sometimes the opposite works, right? Where it's somebody that is completely on the other end of the spectrum with you.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be an interesting one. We've talked about doing some shows where we have a couple people join and we talk about specific parts of this thing. And so we've had some former guests that might be interesting to have back and talk on certain stuff. And collabs would be one that would be interesting to have you join us again for, just because you've done some interesting ones with a bunch of different people. And so, yeah, that might be a topic we could explore a little bit deeper in another show.
Absolutely. And that, I think that's another thing that influences my design is I'm pretty sure that everybody on this panel, and me and Sean have done a collab. Like I could take your knife and put my stuff on it and make it different. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And then because your stuff is different, like it's signature. So therefore I can, if I put my spin on it, it's going to work. But if you you get what I'm saying? So if I pick a guy their knife looks like 5 other dudes, you know what I mean? That type of thing. I can't do anything with that. Right.
Yeah.
Because, it's weird.
Yep. Yeah. There's good combos and there's bad combos.
Oh, there's for sure. Terrible ones.
Yep. Yep. Well, man, again, thanks for taking the time to chat with us and sharing your background and perspective. I think it was a very good conversation, so we appreciate you.
Yeah, I feel sorry for you having to chop it up.
All good. We figured
hopefully I didn't go from one subject to the other too quickly. But
no, it's very typical of our conversation. So yeah, we're good. Well, Sean, Michael, Tom, any last thoughts here before we sign off?
No, that was good.
Yeah, solid. Good talk.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks again, man. We'll appreciate everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, man. Thank you.
Take care, folks. Thanks for listening.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account, @CrineKnives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram @BirchtreeBlades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram @msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram @markofthemaker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.